What is the Mishnah? I'm glad you asked. Greetings, Seeker. It is I, your friendly neighborhood rabbi, and I'm here to tell you today what the Mishnah is. I get a lot of questions from viewers about what various Jewish books are. My video on what is the Tanakh is very popular. If you don't know what Tanakh is, you should watch a very popular video about it. When people are getting to know Jewish literature, they're like, hey, Rabbi, what's the difference between the written Torah and the oral Torah? Well, today I'm going to answer that question along with the important question of what is the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a foundational text of rabbinic literature. It first came into printed form early in the 3rd century of the Common Era, or about the year 200. And it was redacted by a fellow named Yehuda Hanassi, often translated as Judah the Prince. I'm not sure what he was prince of. It wasn't like Prince Valiant or Prince Charming, although I'm sure he was charming. But he was like the boss of his thing. So they called him Yehuda Hanassi, or Judah the Boss. And Judah the Boss was responsible for redacting the Mishnah. Now, when you hear the word redacting, you may be thinking of those like secret letters from the CIA with all the fun stuff blacked out. In this case, redacting means taking an oral tradition and writing it all down into a fixed form. Let me take you way, way back to Mount Sinai when the Jews first got the Torah from God. Our tradition has it that at the time God was dictating the Torah to Moses, and Moses sitting there writing stuff down. I'm not going to lie to you, there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that's not obvious as to what it means. And so Moses is asking him questions. Hey God, what does this part mean? What does this part mean? And God says, okay, I'm going to tell you, but don't write this part down because that would just make the book way too long, especially if you're writing it on stone and have to carry it down mountains. So I think this part was on paper. Or papyrus? Parchment? So Moses would write down stuff that God said, and God would explain to him the more expanded meaning of what Moses was writing down. And after they were done, God said, okay, Moses, all that stuff that I told you that you didn't write down, make sure you pass that on to somebody so that that information is not lost. And there's even a section of the Mishnah called Pirkei Avot, which begins with the statement that Moses got the Torah from Mount Sinai, from God, and then passed some teachings on to Yehoshua, to Joshua, his second in command. Joshua gave that information over to the elders, and this oral tradition of the more expanded or deeper meaning behind the words that are in the Torah was passed from generation to generation. And from here we have the division of Torah into kind of two parts. On the one hand, we have Torah Shebiktav, or the written Torah, and Torah Shebal Peh, or the oral tradition of Torah. And the written tradition was passed down in writing. People would make exact copies of what was written before. And likewise, the oral tradition was passed down, and people would pass on the oral teachings as best they could. I don't know if you've ever played telephone, but they're actually way better at it than your typical game of telephone. Now, one of the rules of the oral transmission of the law is that you're not allowed to write it down. This part's supposed to be written, this part's supposed to not be written. Can't write that down. It's a little like Fight Club. It's actually nothing like Fight Club. And this oral tradition was very detailed, was very expansive. By the time of the Second Temple, around year 0 of the Common Era or so, it's a good guess that nobody knew the entire thing, because there were these guys named Tanaim, and their job was to memorize sections of it and repeat it. That's what Tana means, is to repeat. And so anytime somebody wanted to discuss the oral tradition, they would say, hey, you who remembered all the stuff about the dietary laws, come over here and tell us the laws, and then we'll talk about it. It's a little bit like the end of Fahrenheit 451, where there were people who were walking around and each one of them had memorized a book or two, and that's how they were preserving literature after all the books had been burned. Only this kind of worked in reverse, because we came upon a problem around the year 70 of the Common Era when the Second Temple was destroyed by the invading Romans. Jewish communities of Jerusalem and beyond were scattered all over the place. A lot of rabbis and scholars were killed because they were part of the revolution against the Romans. And so by Yehuda Hanassi's day, they were worried that so many of these people who had memorized the law had been killed that they ran a risk of losing the oral tradition. So they said, okay, we're going to break our main rule here and write this down. So under Yehuda Hanassi's supervision, they wrote down all of the Torah Shebal Peh. and that became the Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah isn't just one book. The Mishnah is a somewhat encyclopedic work. It's divided into 6 starim, or orders, and each of those orders is divided into between 7 and 12 tractates, or masechtot. And there are 63 tractates altogether, and they cover the entire breadth of oral tradition about the written Torah. And what they contained are different rabbis' statements about what the law of this or that was. Everything from what time you're supposed to say your daily prayers, to how the sacrifices were conducted back when they had a temple, to the dietary laws, to how much to give to charity. All right, John, this is a bunch of Iron Age mumbo jumbo. I don't need to know all this stuff. Is there anything in the Mishnah that's relevant to me? I'm glad you asked. The Mishnah is terribly relevant to us today on a couple of different fronts. One, it's got some practical stuff in there that still applies today. Maybe you are not a plowman. Maybe you don't have a field that you're not supposed to cut the corners of so that the poor who glean from the crops can eat that day. Maybe you think, this doesn't apply to me. A lot of it has to do with the temple, which isn't even up anymore. But do you ever have sex? Didn't know this was going to be a not safe for work video. Probably should have told you about that. There's something in the Mishnah about how often husbands and wives should cohabitate. Not necessarily to put the kibosh on it. In fact, Judaism is very sex positive when it comes to having sex as a way of cementing a relationship between two people who are committed to each other. The Mishnah on how often couples should do this basically start with the premise that it's the man's responsibility to cooperate to keep the wife happy, and how often he has to do that depends on what his line of work is. You know, basically, if you're a ship captain and you're not home for 6 months at a stretch, you should be with your wife at least every 6 months. If you drive a camel caravan, which the modern equivalent would be like a long-haul trucker, you should be together at least every month. If you are a rabbi or another scholar and you're spending all day, every day, 6 days a week up until Shabbat in the study hall, you better be taking care of business on Shabbat. Did I just say taking care of business on Shabbat? This is the exception. And if you are a man of leisure, it should be every day. So if you think this book has nothing to say about modern life, it absolutely does. But on a more macro level, this is an incredibly important book to Jewish thought because it sets a tone for how Jews think about things by canonizing argument. Almost every discussion of law in the Mishnah, and by law I mean, based on what the Torah says, what does God want from us? Every discussion of the interpretation of what the Torah means usually goes something like this. This is the rule for this thing according to this rabbi. This other rabbi disagrees with him, and here's why. The majority sides with so-and-so, and yet we're going to preserve the argument. We're going to preserve the minority report. In almost every case, there's no one perfect opinion in how to do something. And even though, for the most part, some majority opinion will prevail, that's how we know what to do when we're trying to follow the Torah, every disagreement with that majority opinion is published. And the effect of this is to create a culture of holy argumentation. I teach a lot of students who are considering converting to Judaism, and a lot of them say to me, one of the things that they love the most about Judaism is that not only does it permit questioning, it even encourages questioning and raises it to the level of a holy practice. And all that started with the Mishnah, this little legal encyclopedia that was first written down about 1800 years ago. It is a foundational work of rabbinic Judaism. That's how Judaism is practiced today. It's the first Jewish literature that I had to study when I started thinking about becoming a rabbi. If you're learning Hebrew, it's actually a relatively easy book to learn. Like, the Hebrew is way easier than the Hebrew in the Tanakh itself. And a lot of modern Hebrew is based on the Hebrew that's in the Mishnah. Seeker, thank you for watching this video about this wonderful Jewish book we like to call the Mishnah. If you have any more questions about it, anything I didn't cover, please put them in the comments below this video. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel as I explain other aspects of rabbinic literature and talk about all sorts of other fun stuff too. You will be updated auto-magically if you subscribe. If you're interested in the book that I've got coming out that has a lot of wisdom from the Mishnah in it in a way that's accessible for you. Make sure you click on the link to join my book squad, and you can download the first chapter right away just to look it over and see if this book is for you. But if you get the chance, I know the Mishnah is for you because there's something in there for everybody. Thanks again for watching, Seeker. Peace.